My name is Mark. If you saw me on the street, you wouldn't look twice. It's just another guy in his 50s, probably thinking about his mortgage or what to have for dinner. I own a small marketing agency downtown. The biggest stress in my life used to be a client threatening to leave, or a campaign that wasn't getting enough clicks. A normal life. That's what I had. But that man, the one who worried about deadlines and spreadsheets, he died 3 months ago. I know because I'm what's left over. It happened on a Tuesday. A semi-truck jumped the median on the interstate. There was a bright light, the sound of metal screaming, and then nothing. The paramedics told my wife I flatlined. Gone. For a full 7 minutes. They called it a miracle when my heart started again. A second chance. They were wrong. It wasn't a second chance. It was a warning. Because in those 7 minutes I wasn't in some peaceful floating void. There was no white light. No tunnel. No choir of angels waiting to welcome me home. What I saw, what they forced me to see, it will shatter everything you believe about what it means to be successful, to be famous, to be admired. It will make you question who you're really performing for in this life, because I saw where the applause leads. And trust me, it's not to heaven. Before the accident, my world was small, and I liked it that way. It was a world I could measure. It fit neatly onto a spreadsheet. My days were a rhythm of numbers. Click-through rates, conversion funnels, return on ad spend. I'd walk into my agency and the smell of coffee and low-grade anxiety was my version of success. I was the captain of a very small, very safe ship, and I thought that made me an admiral. My life ran on a script I had written for myself. Wake up at 6 a.m., check emails before my feet hit the floor. A quick, silent breakfast with my wife, Sarah, where the loudest sound was the clinking of spoons against ceramic. She'd try to talk, ask me about my day ahead. I'd just nod, my mind already in a meeting room, strategizing how to sell people things they didn't need. I thought providing was the same as being present. I was wrong. I remember one night, maybe a week before it all happened, we were sitting on the couch. Sarah put her hand on my arm. I can still feel the warmth of it. She said, "Mark, are you happy?" Her eyes were searching mine, looking for something I hadn't had in years. I just looked at the TV and said, "We're doing great, honey. Business is booming." I saw her smile fade in the reflection on the dark screen. She pulled her hand away. In that moment, I knew I was failing at the only job that truly mattered, but I didn't know how to stop. The truth is, I was a ghost in my own life. I had the nice house, the respectable business, the wife who deserved a better husband. I had checked all the boxes society tells a man to check. But late at night, I'd stand in the kitchen staring out at the quiet suburban street, and this profound emptiness would just wash over me. It felt like I was playing a part, performing for an audience that wasn't even there. I kept thinking that the next big client, the next award, the next zero in my bank account would finally make me feel real. But what happened next was even worse. The day of the crash, I landed the biggest account of my career, the Whitfield account, a multi-million-dollar deal. I remember standing in my office, the phone still warm in my hand, looking out at the city. My team was cheering. They were popping a cheap bottle of champagne, and I felt absolutely nothing. The applause in that room was just noise. It was the loneliest I'd ever felt. I got in my car to drive home, my mind already spinning, not with joy, but with the pressure of what came next. I was chasing a horizon that kept moving further away. I was so focused on the applause I thought I needed, I couldn't hear the silence that was screaming right next to me. I had no idea that in less than 10 minutes I'd be begging for just one more moment in that silence. One more chance to answer my wife's question. What do you think is worse, a life that's a clear failure, or one that looks like a perfect success from the outside but is completely hollow on the inside? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story is hitting home, subscribe and hit the bell. I have so much more to tell you about what happens when the performance ends for good. Looking back, the universe was screaming at me to stop. I just had my headphones on too loud to hear it. The entire week leading up to the crash was filled with these little glitches in reality, like cracks forming in a wall you've been staring at your whole life. I just chose to ignore them. It started small. A few days before, I was shaving, looking in the bathroom mirror. For just a fraction of a second, my reflection didn't move with me. It just stayed there, staring. Its eyes weren't angry or scared, they were just empty. I blinked hard, splashed water on my face, and when I looked again, it was just me. Just tired, middle-aged Mark. I blamed it on lack of sleep. A trick of the light. But the cold feeling it left in my gut, that stayed. Then, the day before, I was in the office, trying to close that Whitfield deal. My computer screen went black. Not off, but a deep, perfect black. And then a single line of white text appeared. It wasn't an error code. It just said, "Is this really what you want to be remembered for?" I hit the escape key like it had burned me, and my spreadsheet popped right back up. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? My IT guy? I convinced myself it was some weird virus. A prank. Anything but the truth. But what happened next was even worse. That night I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs to get some water and saw Sarah asleep on the couch, a book on her chest. The TV was on, muted. It was playing one of those old home movies we had digitized years ago. It was our daughter's 5th birthday party. I was there holding the camera. But in the video, on the screen, I wasn't behind the camera, I was just gone. The whole scene played out as if I had never existed. Sarah was there, our friends, our little girl blowing out her candles, but I was completely erased from my own memory. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. It was like watching my own funeral. The morning of the crash was the final sign. I was running late after landing the Whitfield account. As I grabbed my keys from the bowl by the door, my wedding ring slipped off my finger. It didn't just fall. It rolled across the hardwood floor with this perfect, eerie silence and came to a stop right at Sarah's feet as she walked into the hall. She picked it up, her expression unreadable. She held it out to me. "Don't lose this," she said, her voice quiet. Her eyes held mine for a second too long, and for the first time I felt like she could see right through me. She saw the ghost I had become. I slid the ring back on. It felt cold, heavy, like a shackle. I walked out that door knowing, on some deep, primal level, that I was walking away from everything that mattered. I was so focused on the applause I thought I'd get from a client, I didn't realize I was about to face a final curtain call. Have you ever had that feeling? That deep down certainty that you're on the wrong path but you keep walking anyway? Let me know in the comments. If these stories resonate with you, please subscribe and turn on notifications. The next part of my story is what happened when I ignored that final warning. You won't believe it. I was on the interstate driving home. The sun was low, a blinding orange glare that turned every windshield into a mirror of fire. My mind wasn't on the road. It was back in my office replaying the empty cheers for the Whitfield account. It was in my living room seeing Sarah's smile fade in the reflection of the TV. That cold wedding ring felt like it was burning a hole in my finger. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about the next deal or the next quarter. I was thinking, is this it? Is this all there is? That's when I saw it. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was just there. A semi-truck, its massive chrome grille catching the sun like a dragon's teeth, was airborne. It was coming over the concrete median, moving in a slow, impossible arc. It looked less like a crash and more like a glitch in the world. Time didn't slow down. It shattered. In the space of a single heartbeat, I lived 1,000 moments. I saw the terrified face of the truck driver, his mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. I saw the asphalt of the median crumbling into dust. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, but I wasn't steering. I was just holding on. My entire life, all the years I spent chasing applause, chasing numbers on a spreadsheet, they all just vanished. The Whitfield account was dust. The awards on my shelf were meaningless plastic. The only thing that was real, the only thing that filled that final, terrifying second was Sarah's face. Her eyes asking me that simple question, "Are you happy?" My last thought wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a plea. It was my silent answer to her, an answer I was too much of a coward to give when it mattered. No, I wasn't. Then came the sound. A sound so loud it was a physical force, a shriek of metal tearing itself apart that vibrated through my bones. It was the world screaming. The impact wasn't a jolt, it was an erasure. A blinding white light filled my vision, followed by the crystalline explosion of the windshield. A single, sharp, searing pain shot through my chest like a hot poker straight through the heart, and then silence. A profound, heavy, absolute silence. The pain was gone. The light was gone. The feeling of the steering wheel under my fingers was gone. It felt like I was being squeezed, pressed from all sides by an incredible weight, and then released. A sudden, terrifying lightness. I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't anywhere. There was just the blackness. The show was over. The curtain had fallen, and I wasn't backstage. I was just gone. But the blackness didn't last. It wasn't an ending. It was a transition. The silence started to hum. A low-frequency vibration I felt not in my ears, but in the very core of what I now was. There was a gentle tug, like a current in a deep, dark ocean, pulling me up and away. I didn't have eyes, but I could see. I was floating, weightless, looking down at the wreckage on the interstate. My car was a mangled heap of metal, crushed like a soda can, and I saw him. I saw me. My body was slumped over the steering wheel, a dark stain spreading across my shirt. There was a strange disconnect, like watching a movie about a man I used to know. There was no pain, no panic, just a cold, clinical observation. The paramedics were there, shouting things I couldn't hear. They were trying to save a body that was already an empty shell. But what happened next was even worse. As I watched them pull my lifeless form from the car, I felt that current grow stronger. It wasn't pulling me up, toward the sky. It was pulling me down. The scene of the crash, the flashing lights, Sarah's world, It all started to shrink, folding in on itself until it was just a tiny, distant point of light, and then it winked out. I was back in the blackness, but this time it was different. It was a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was a cold that seeped into you, a cold that froze your hope. And there was a smell, faint at first, then overpowering. The smell of old regrets and burnt-out ambition. It was the smell of utter despair. I wasn't falling. I was being drawn forward. A pinprick of light appeared in the distance. Not a bright, welcoming white light, but a dull, bruised, angry red. As I got closer, the light grew, stretching out into a sky with no sun, no moon, no stars. Just a permanent, blood-red twilight. The silence was replaced by a sound, a constant low moan that sounded like 1,000 lonely winds blowing through a dead city. The ground beneath me, if you could call it that, was a vast, dry wasteland of cracked rock and black dust. There were figures in the distance. Thousands of them. They weren't walking with purpose. They were just wandering, aimlessly shuffling through the dust, their heads bowed, their faces hollow and blank. This wasn't a waiting room. It wasn't purgatory. I knew with a certainty that chilled me more than the cold itself that this was a final destination. I thought the crash was the end of my performance. I was wrong. I had just arrived at the theater for the final terrible review. Have you ever wondered what the first thing you'd feel in the afterlife would be? Relief? Peace? Or a cold, dawning horror that you've ended up in the wrong place? Let me know your thoughts below. And if you need to know what I saw in that place, subscribe and hit the bell, because the first person I recognized in that crowd, it will change how you see fame forever. That current, that tide of despair, it had a destination. It pulled me toward the heart of that dead place, toward a structure that rose out of the black dust like a broken bone. It was a colossal amphitheater, jagged and cruel, carved from the same cracked rock as the ground. And in the center, there was a stage. On it, a single figure stood under a spotlight that wasn't a light, but a pillar of concentrated misery. I knew him instantly. Everyone in the world would have. He was a rock god, a legend whose anthems had been the soundtrack to my youth. On Earth, he commanded stadiums of 100,000 screaming fans. Here he was a skeleton in a tattered leather jacket. Pathetic. He opened his mouth to sing his most famous song, the one about living forever. But what came out wasn't a voice. It was a dry, dissonant groan, a sound of pure agony. But what happened next was even worse. The audience wasn't made of lost souls. They were things. Creatures with wide, cruel smiles and eyes that held no light. And they began to applaud. It wasn't a sound of appreciation. Each clap was like the crack of a whip. Thunderous, sarcastic, and full of hate. They screamed at him, their voices like grinding stones. Sing for us. Sing for your own glory. The man who lived for the applause was now being tortured by it for eternity. He had traded his soul for a stage that had become his cage. The current pulled me away, dragging me into a long, dark corridor. It was like an art gallery from a nightmare. Instead of paintings, the walls were lined with mirrors, and in front of each one, another famous face. I saw an actress, an Oscar winner celebrated for her timeless beauty. She was staring at her reflection, but it wasn't her. It was a twisted, monstrous thing, a face that showed every lie, every bit of envy, every ounce of vanity she had hidden behind her perfect smile. She screamed and beat against the mirror, but her hands just passed through the glass. She was trapped, forced to stare at her true self forever. A few mirrors down, a stand-up comedian. A man who sold out arenas by making the world laugh. His hell was silence. He was forced to listen to a recording of every joke he ever told, but the laughter had been edited out. There was just the dead, empty sound of his own voice echoing in a void. The man who fed on the joy of others was now starving in its absolute absence. I couldn't take it anymore. I fell to my knees on that cold, dusty floor, the sheer horror of it all just crushing me. This place didn't punish you for what you did. It punished you for why you did it. It punished self-worship, the desperate, hungry need for the applause of men over everything else. And then everything froze. The screaming actress, the silent comedian, the mocking applause from the amphitheater, it all just stopped. A voice filled my mind. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears. It was a thought, a presence, so vast and powerful it felt like a mountain was speaking inside my soul. It was neither male nor female. It was just truth. They gained the world, it said, but they lost their souls. The applause of men is a hollow sound here. Fame is a crown of ash. They are not here for what they did, but for what they refused to do. Acknowledge that the glory was never theirs to begin with. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a tour of hell. It was a message, and I was the messenger. You will go back, the voice commanded, a feeling of immense weight and purpose settling over me. Tell them the thrones of earth are dust. Tell them the cameras will go dark. Tell them that in the end, there is only an audience of one, and his judgment does not applaud. It weighs. The last thing I felt was a violent upward pull, like a fish being ripped from the deep. The red sky, the gallery of mirrors, the entire landscape of disparate, all shattered like glass, and I was thrown back into the light. When you think about the end, do you worry more about the bad things you've done, or the good things you did for the wrong reasons? Let me know in the comments. This is the most important question I can ask. If you need to hear the rest of this story, subscribe and hit the bell. Because what happened when I woke up, it was the beginning of the real trial. That violent upward pull was like being born in reverse. The gallery of mirrors, the silent comedian, the screaming actress, they all dissolved into a million shards of black glass. The blood-red sky folded in on itself, and the sound of that eternal sarcastic applause faded into a distant echo. I was rocketing away from that place, not through space, but through meaning. The blackness returned, but this time it wasn't cold. It wasn't empty. It was still. A profound, absolute stillness, like the moment between breaths. There was no up or down, no forward or back. There was only me and that presence. The voice. The choice is yours. It resonated within me, not as a command, but as a simple statement of fact. You can be released. The pain of your body, the hollowness of your life, it can all end now. You can rest. And I felt it. The temptation was overwhelming. It was a sweet, seductive promise of peace. No more deadlines. No more spreadsheets. No more looking into my wife's eyes and seeing disappointment. No more having to face the ghost I had become. I could just stop, let go, disappear into this quiet nothingness. For a second, a single selfish second, it was all I wanted. But what happened next was even worse. A memory flooded me, clearer than anything I had ever seen. It was Sarah standing in our hallway holding my wedding ring. The look in her eyes, it wasn't disappointment. I had been wrong. It was fear. She was afraid of losing the man she had married, the man she still believed was in there somewhere. And her quiet words, "Don't lose this," echoed in the stillness. She wasn't talking about the ring. In that moment, I understood the real hell. It wasn't the amphitheater or the gallery of mirrors. The real hell would be accepting peace for myself, while leaving her alone in the wreckage of the life I had built and then abandoned. My mission wasn't just to be a messenger to the world. It was to be a husband to my wife. I have to go back, I thought, with a certainty that was absolute. I choose her. A feeling of warmth spread through me, like the first rays of a sun I hadn't seen in an eternity. The voice spoke one last time, its message so simple, so profound, it would become the compass for the rest of my life. Then go. And this time, listen for the applause of a single heart. It is the only sound that will follow you here. The stillness shattered. It felt like falling from a skyscraper, but in every direction at once. The silent void was ripped apart by a deafening roar, the sound of life rushing back in. A searing, white-hot pain exploded in my chest, and the weight of my own body crashed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I felt the rough texture of fabric on my cheek, the cold plastic of a tube in my throat. My eyelids fluttered open. The first thing I saw was a blur of fluorescent light, a harsh, sterile whiteness that burned after the eternal twilight I'd grown used to. The first thing I heard was a sound, a frantic, rhythmic beeping. It was fast, panicked, but it was steady. It was the sound of a heart that had been restarted. It was the sound of my second chance. My vision cleared. A face hovered over me. A doctor, his expression a mask of pure astonishment. And behind him, Sarah. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her eyes were wide with a hope that defied everything the doctors had told her. They told her I was gone. They were wrong. I had just gotten back. Do you believe a person can truly change after facing the end, or do we just get better at hiding who we really are? Let me know your opinion in the comments. If you need to know what happens when you try to explain a trip to hell to your family, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. The story of my return was in many ways harder than the story of my departure. Waking up wasn't a gentle drift back to consciousness, it was a demolition. One second I was being pulled by that final divine command, and the next, my entire being was slammed back into my body with the force of a train wreck. The pain in my chest was a white-hot sun, and every beep from the heart monitor beside me felt like a hammer blow against my skull. The air tasted sterile, chemical. It was the taste of a world I no longer recognized. My eyes cracked open, and the fluorescent lights of the ICU were a special kind of torture. A harsh, artificial glare after the eternal, blood-red twilight. The first face I focused on was a doctor's, his mouth hanging open like he'd just seen a ghost. He was saying words, things like unprecedented recovery and neurologically intact. They were just sounds. They had a file on me, a chart with numbers and data. They thought they knew my story, but they had no idea what chapter 1 was on. They saw a medical miracle. I knew it was a signed and delivered message, Then I saw her, Sarah. She was standing just behind the doctors, her hand covering her mouth. Her face was a road map of the last 7 minutes of her life. Tear tracks, the pale skin, the exhaustion in her eyes that went soul deep. Our eyes met, and the whole chaotic room just disappeared. There was no sound, no beeping, no doctors. There was only her. I saw the woman I had spent 20 years taking for granted, the applause of a single heart. That's what the voice had said. And in that moment, her terrified, hopeful, beautiful gaze was the only sound I could hear. They took the breathing tube out a few hours later. My throat felt like I'd swallowed gravel. Sarah sat beside me, holding my hand. Her touch was the first real thing I'd felt since coming back. She was trying to smile, telling me not to talk, to rest. The old me would have asked about the company, about the Whitfield account. The old me would have tried to calculate the cost of all this, but that man was gone. He'd been burned away in the gallery of mirrors. I squeezed her hand. She leaned in close. My first words weren't about the pain or the crash or what had happened. I just looked into her eyes, and with a voice that was barely a whisper, I said, "I'm sorry." Her face crumbled, not with sadness, but with pure, unadulterated shock. She stared at me as if I were a stranger, because I was. The man she was married to didn't apologize. He solved problems. He didn't do vulnerability. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she just nodded, unable to speak, squeezing my hand back so tightly it hurt. And the pain felt good. It felt real. But trying to live in this world again with the knowledge of the next was harder than dying. The TV in the corner of my room would flash images of celebrities at movie premieres, politicians giving speeches, tech billionaires unveiling their new products. I saw them all differently now. I didn't see success. I saw souls on a stage performing for a cruel and mocking audience that would one day clap them into their own personal hell. I saw crowns of ash. I tried to explain some of it to Sarah one night, but the words came out wrong, disjointed. I sounded like a man who'd had a brain injury. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the love for her husband warring with the fear that the man who came back wasn't the man who had left. I was back in her world, but I had never felt more alone. How do you explain an eternal truth to a world that only believes what it can see? And what do you do when the people you love most start looking at you like you're crazy? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you need to understand what happens when a changed man has to face his old unchanged life, subscribe and hit that bell. Because my partners from the agency were about to come for a visit, and I knew I couldn't go back to selling illusions. The day my partners, David and Liam, came to visit was the day my old life came to collect its dues. They walked in carrying a ridiculously large gift basket filled with expensive cheese and wine. Things the old Mark would have loved. They had on their best concerned but confident faces, the same ones they used to reassure nervous clients. They were performing. I could see it now. Everyone was performing. David clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. "Mark, man, you look better than you should," he said, forcing a laugh. Liam just nodded, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the foredrip, the monitors. They were uncomfortable. Death had walked into our little world of spreadsheets and profit margins, and they didn't have a strategy for it. And they started talking business almost immediately. It was their comfort zone. They told me the Whitfield account was secure, that they'd smoothed everything over. They were proud, expecting me to be relieved. They were talking about contracts and deliverables, and all I could see was the hollow face of that rock star on his eternal stage. They were polishing a crown of ash and calling it gold. But what happened next was even worse. David pulled a chair close, leaning in with that conspiratorial tone he used when he was about to propose something brilliant. "Listen, we've got it all handled," he said. "You just focus on getting back on your feet. The ship is steady. We just need our captain back at the helm." He smiled, waiting for the applause. Waiting for the old Mark to thank him, to feel that familiar rush of importance. I just looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the fear behind his eyes. Not for me, but for the business. For the life he had built. He wasn't my partner. He was a man in a mirror, terrified of his own reflection. I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and awkward, until he couldn't stand it anymore. "What is it?" he asked, his smile faltering. I took a breath, and then I delivered the final verdict on the man I used to be. "I'm out, David," I said. My voice was quiet, but it hit that room like a bomb. "I'm selling my shares. The company is yours. I'm done." The color drained from his face. Liam actually took a step back, like I'd physically struck him. They thought it was the accident, a concussion, trauma. They started talking about taking time off, about not making rash decisions. They couldn't comprehend it. How could a man walk away from the very thing he'd sacrificed his soul to build? They didn't know that was exactly why I had to. Sarah had been standing quietly in the corner of the room. I saw the panic flash in her eyes for a second, the fear of the unknown, of our future. But then she looked at my face. She saw the peace there. She saw the man she married finally coming home. She walked over, stood behind me, and put her hands on my shoulders. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. It was the only applause I needed. That night, after they had left in a cloud of confused anger, the room was quiet. Sarah sat on the edge of my bed. "Are you sure, Mark?" she asked, her voice soft. I took her hand. "For 20 years, I built a business that sold people things they didn't need. To get applause from people I didn't know," I told her, the words finally coming out right. "I was a professional ghost. But what I saw over there, it taught me something. The only thing you truly own in this life is your message, the story you leave behind." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt no need to perform. My new job is to be the messenger. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she was smiling. She finally understood. She wasn't losing her husband to a breakdown. She was getting him back from the dead. I realized that all my years in marketing hadn't been a waste. I knew how to get a message out. I knew how to capture attention. Only now I wouldn't be selling soft drinks or luxury cars. I'd be delivering a warning, a hope, a truth. I'd be using the tools of a world obsessed with fame to tear down the very idea of it. So here's my question to you. If you were given a second chance, would you have the courage to burn your old life to the ground to build a new one that truly matters? Let me know in the comments. And if this message is for you, subscribe and hit the bell, because I have so many more stories to tell you about the souls I met and the truths they're begging for you to hear. That night in the hospital, after my old life had stormed out the door, a quiet settled in the room that I hadn't felt in years. It was the sound of a stage finally gone dark. Sarah sat beside me, not saying a word, just holding my hand. We didn't talk about the money or the future or what came next. We didn't have to. For the first time in our marriage, we were both present in the same moment, and it was more valuable than any account I had ever landed. The faint, steady beep of the heart monitor was the only applause I ever wanted to hear again. It's been 3 months since I came back. I sold my shares for less than they were worth, and I've never felt richer. I don't live in that big, empty house anymore. Sarah and I moved into a smaller place, a place where you can hear each other from room to room. Sometimes I just sit in the kitchen and watch her garden through the window. I watch the way the sun catches her hair, and I feel this overwhelming sense of gratitude that's so powerful it almost brings me to my knees. I'm not a ghost anymore. I'm learning how to be a husband. I'm learning how to be human. The message I brought back wasn't just about celebrities, that gallery of mirrors, that stage of despair. It's being built for people every single day. It's for the person working 80 hours a week for a promotion their boss won't remember. It's for the person chasing likes on a photo, mistaking digital validation for real love. It's for anyone who climbs a ladder only to find it was leaning against the wrong wall. We're all performing. The only difference is the size of the stage and the volume of the applause. What I saw taught me the most terrifying and liberating truth. This life is a rehearsal. It's a casting call. And you're not auditioning for the world. You're auditioning for eternity. The applause of men is the most addictive and dangerous drug on the planet because it makes you forget who the real director is. I spent my whole life trying to get a standing ovation from an audience that won't even be there on opening night. I was sent back to tell you to stop performing, to stop chasing the echo and start listening for the voice. My life now is about one thing, delivering that message. I traded my marketing agency for this camera. I traded my client list for you, because I have to believe that I was pulled out of that wreckage for a reason. I have to believe that my 7 minutes in hell can save someone else a lifetime of chasing crowns of ash. So I have to ask you, and I need you to be honest with yourself. Is the life you're living right now just a performance? And if it is, what do you think will happen when the curtain finally falls and the only applause left is the sound of your own choices? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. This is a conversation we need to have. If this story resonated with you, subscribe and hit the bell. I have so many more faces I need to tell you about. So many more truths from that place that they are desperate for you to hear before it's too late.